So, our last speaker is Raine Ampuja, former chief conductor of the Guards Band, and maybe I should give a brief explanation. Actually, well, I wouldn't say that it was maybe it started as a half joke in a coffee table discussion in JAPA when Janne was actually still the director there, that we were talking about who are the people that we should invite to this kind of an event, and then somebody said, well, it would be so nice to have somebody who has an insight or insights to the musical choices of the Independence Day reception in the presidential castle. And I contacted actually the current chief conductor first, but he was also very interested, but sadly they had some sort of a rehearsal somewhere and a big concert coming. But Raine was equally enthusiastic on this topic, and we are very glad to have him here. And yes, he's as I said, he's now retired from that duty, but an independent researcher, I guess, also working on a history of Finnish brass bands. Yep.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for this invitation. I'm kind of users' opinions about this item. So I was studying in this Civilians Academy and made my examination with the French horn, and later on I found myself as a chief conductor of the Guards, because I was making also light and serious music. That was a very obvious choice for me. But thinking about this item, nationalism and ceremonials, well, I'm using wrong mic, by the way. I think that's a very important thing which I have been thinking very often, because it can have also some nasty sides if we emphasize too much nationalism in our music. So I think we have to be very careful about what kind of program and that kind of materials we are going to use in this context. But to understand this music, I think we will have to go a little bit back in history. So folk music and military music, they have a lot of connections. It's of course it's a difficult question, what is military music it itself at all? It's kind of moving music or church music. But if we put it in context, then it makes sense. If we play, for example, some light music with uniforms, it can turn to be military music. And in other cases, it's just normal light music. So it has two phases also. But in our national epic, Lemminkäinen is going to war and making signals. And in that way, we got to understand that the signals, which are very important in military music, because it's very functional music. For example, when bass drum hits, then you have to put your left foot down, so it's very functional music. And in another way, if you play signals and drumming, it means that troops are supposed to do some tricks. When this started, this kind of handle music, it is in 1700. Gustav II Adolf's army was organized so that they had regiments, even in Finland, several of them, and it was organized so that they had signals and drummings for certain purposes or music. If we go a little bit earlier, in Turku Castle in 1546, they had also a band with 20 members not in same time, but if you think about the ceremonies in that castle during that time when Duke Johan was in that castle and his court was organized there, every day was written in same way. They had breakfast, they had dinner, they had some lunch, and they have ceremonials for them and signals for them. So in a way, those signals organized the whole day, made a schedule about what happened in that castle. On the other way of thinking, they had two kind of bands there, which is very interesting thinking, when everybody knows that the instrument technology and the development of the instruments it itself to describe very much what happens in music. They had kind of, in very many other countries, this is the same way. There was kind of soft music and loud music. And in Johan's Herttua, the Duke of Johan card called them musica bassa and uppslagare or trumpetare. So that describes that you needed kind of soft music inside, and when you went outside and to battles and combats, you needed more loud instruments, kind of timpanis and trumpets and so on. So that was the music's function all the way to 1900 way. And if you're thinking about Finnish music, so that's why I said that when we are talking about, especially in this year, about Sibelius' effects and why he's so kind of shadowed every other composers and music. I think there's one question, an answer to that is that we were first under Swedish, kind of Eastland, Östland or Sverige, Sweden, and then we turned to be a part of Russian, Dutch, Grand Dutch or Russia, and they had armies and they had musicians from Gustav II's time, but the instruments were also came from the army, and the musician there wasn't special Finnish. For example, in that Duke Johan in Turku Castle, I think more or less they were from Poland. I don't, Kari maybe knows that better. But then anyway, so that's one question about it, which I haven't researched not so much. But thinking about time from 1819 to 1917, there was 3 times when the army bands and the army was brought down, disassembled again and found again. And if you are thinking about, for example, Helsinki, in early stage or some 1812 or 1819, at least half of the musicians in those orchestras came from Russia, from Germany and other countries. And when they put down the army once again, they also lose the instruments. They were transported back to St. Petersburg and wherever. So that's why we didn't have in Helsinki and Turku that kind of bands, mitä sanotaan, pysyvää orkesteritoimintaa, okay. We didn't have any permanent orchestra going on, so because there were so many military musicians in those bands, because the armies needed more and more musicians to their regiments. So the function was to make signals and drummings and so on for the troops, and later on it turned also kind of psychological things affecting the persons, how to fight and so on. And that started in 1700s when they made in headquarters kind of small quartets with shawm bands, skalme ja orkesteri oboen tyyppinen, like the shawm in English. And those bands also could make that kind of music after church ceremonials, for example. That's why in Finland, you know, because of the population, the villages and cities are quite small. If you are thinking about that old saying, home, religion, and fatherland, or it's very patriotic way of thinking, but that triangle is still very easy to find in small cities in Finland. There was first garrison, there were musicians because the regiment needed them, and those bands, musicians started to play also kind of entertaining music, if you can say it that way, and that's how it started. Later on it happened 3 times, as I told you, that the bands broke and the music instruments vanished away. That's why we, in Finland, I think we lack music period from 1800 to 1900, and that also affects a lot of Finnish orchestral music and also what kind of material people have composed. So in that way, nationalism and the military music are heavily connected to each other. But going to these days, I think in Finnish way, I just was reading an Finnish composer's Harri Vuori article in Helsingin Sanomat a few days or 1 week ago, where he was kind of answering the question, how is it to compose in Finland? Are you individual, or is there anything which is influencing to your writing? Is it a kind of, can you be yourself and a personal ideas? And he answered that actually not. You can't do that because you are kind of anyway affected by your nature, your society, the climate, politics, and political things also. So there are a lot of things which you think first that you can avoid, but on the end you can't do that. So there must be some kind of national flavors in our music. And if I think about it, I've been traveling with Gatsband also in several countries, and of course our colleagues, we are all educated as classical musicians, so everybody knows this kind of two phases about making music. Functional music, and on the other way, what is your freedom of making music? And they have said to me, which I didn't think so much earlier, but more and more in the past years, that actually in Finland, because of this background of Swedish Eastland, and on the other hand, Russian pressure, so that makes in our music kind of, it's between Western culture and kind of Eastern culture, and it has kind of, if you think about light Swedish style against more serious Slavonic tastes, it makes kind of very interesting combination. And I think that Sibelius found this out. He could use kind of folk songs, and he also was making music just in right time, just before our independence, and could somehow collect things together. And during that period, there was those bands, those orchestral music was just building. We didn't have any other bands, permanent bands before that, in that point of view. And that makes me think that Sibelius music and that kind of folk music together, that's the answer why it's so powerful. And when we are collecting music, for example, to different kind of ceremonials, wreath-laying ceremonies and that kind of occasions, of course they are kind of mutual things and common things all over the world. But in Finland we have somehow built our own way of, kind of humble way of doing those things. If you are making, for example, wreath-laying ceremonies, they actually doesn't happen so much. People are just standing and we are just laying down the breath, and that's it. In very many other countries there are very tricky ceremonials about these kind of events. That makes me also thinking that a few days ago Sofia Oksanen wrote an article about Finlandization and what happened, why people were so quiet during the 70s. I don't think so either as a professor who answered to that question, so that maybe in Estonia the heroism was kind of emphasizing that we are victims or sacrificial lambs. But in Finland the heroism itself has also been built up in our country. People somehow to emphasize heroic things. I don't know if that's true, but it seems to be a lot of that kind of humble heroism maybe is a kind of picture which people want to write. And when we are making music for example, the first question for the Independence Day ceremonial, so we want to kind of make music for everybody. If you are thinking about, for example, Finnish Army or Finnish Defense Forces, so there are different kinds of persons. There can be highly educated persons and then can be people without any education, and they are starting from same level. So that varies very much to, for example, the British Army, where officers are coming from the upper classes anyway, and they are emphasizing that kind of music also in their different kind of events. I was studying in early 90s, for example, in Royal School of Music in Royal Marines. It was in Dover, in the southern part of England, and that was very interesting to be involved with that kind of music. It was very strict etiquette in everywhere, and you know, in Finland that is not more free. We have more freedom to do that kind of things. Normally in the Independence Days background music we do choose some theme. It's quite obvious that in this year I'm quite sure that people who are involved in collecting the music are emphasizing Sibelius. But they also can be some light musicians. We have used, for example, Georg Malmsteen and so on. So it's not concentrated to serious music or classical music composers. Of course we have used, I'm also convinced that Aulis Sallinen is going to be one of the persons in this year. So it's kind of, we are kind of trying to collect different kind of grades also, different kind of music. Past years they are also not ordered music for the occasion, but very modern music has also been on stage. And the light music, of course, and the dance music has the same theme. But thinking about Independence Day, one thing I have to say that actually people do think that it's a kind of event. Maybe people don't know that actually it's President Kappel's own event, ball. And they, in the final terms, do choose the music. We just do give them a list how we see it, and we to tell the couple about who we have chosen to be the singers. And few times, and if I can say this now, Tarja Halonen he was very detailed. He wanted to change music very often. For example, once times I wrote there, what is that tango for redhead girl? Tango punatukkaiselle tytölle. She didn't want to have that in the program, and that kind of small details have changed. Mauno Koivisto wanted to have very much kind of folk songs on the repertoire because he wanted to sing them also. For example, we made for him a kind of record which they played in aeroplane. It was made so that, I made it with Seppo Hovi by the way, it was made so that it was stereophonic recording. On the left there was a company and singers, and on the right side there was only the company. So they first learned the songs and then they put on the right side on. Then they could make kind of karaoke singing. That started in Mauno Koivisto time. And Martti Ahtisaari emphasized more or less jazz music maybe because his son was so clever jazz bass player, so that's why maybe wanted to have that kind of music. For example, before that we didn't have that occasion on the Yellow Room where they played only jazz music. In this year, or was it, well, I was there not last year, 2013 I was as a guest, and I think this was it was the first time when they had folk music on the Yellow Room. Somebody said to me, yeah, you said that folk music is in very many archives kind of the most important things which they are collecting, or maybe they collect them more or less, it is valued a lot. So of course in that list of music, folk music is also presented. What's the time? Okay, so I wanted to emphasize three things. The historical backgrounds which involves in Finnish music, and wanted to make this kind of emphasize that I think the reason why we don't have so much music from the 1800s and 1900s is because of these small populations, because of the history that these musicians actually had kind of army background. Because there was the musicians and the garrisons. They played first on ceremonials drums and trumpets, and they had the second instruments also, some violins or other instruments. So they had kind of double work, and that affected. For example, let's give one example more. Kaarlekuninkaan metsästys, mitähän se käännetään englanniksi, siis The Hunt of King Carl, maybe, made by Fredrik Paasius. Eli siinä kielellä sitten saksalainen säveltäjä tehnyt maamelaulun ja säveltänyt ensimmäisen suomalaisen oopperan. Ja soittajista, the musicians came, for example, from the early Guards Band of Helsinki. I think there was about 20 members from army bands in that performance, the first performance of Finnish opera. So that also describes how much actually they needed desperately those army musicians to get together those bands. So that makes also kind of strange feeling to me, because I know that so many of them came from abroad, from other countries. They came here during summer times when they played in gardens and different restaurants. Everybody knows that Helsinki, the city of Helsinki, was built more or less in 1900, and they needed restaurants, they need also live music, because they wanted to compete. The population, the customers went to a restaurant where they had music. And those musicians came from very many countries, and they stayed here in army bands. So that's one way what happened there. The first musicians, actually, if you are thinking about musicians, they are very, very late had their first Finnish education. It started in let's say early 2000. I mean, let's say year 1900, mitä tämä sanotaan sitten, 1900-luvun alussa taitteessa, okei, mennään näin päin, ettei mennä englanninkielisessä sataset tässä väärin. 1900-luvun taitteessa vasta tulee ensimmäiset suomalaiset, jotka on saanut suomalaisen koulutuksen soittajiksi. Se on niin myöhäistä. Sellaista. I think this is the last thing which I was supposed to say.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and we have at least 10 minutes for discussion. And also, there's ample room for questions and comments to all speakers. But maybe first to Raine, if somebody has anything pressing in mind. Yeah, maybe a brief explanation for Hans, maybe that this reference to this tango with the girl with the red hair probably was because Tarja Halonen has red hair, so that might have had something to do with it.
Joo. On siellä muitakin tämmöisiä kiellettyjä juttuja. Suomessa mäkin muistan, että arkistossa muun muassa oli nuotti, jota ei saanut soittaa. Että vuosien välillä kun mietti sitä, että joskus ne sai soittaa, sitten tuli aika, että niitä ei saanut soittaa. Otetaanpa nyt, jos nationalismista puhutaan, niin Venäjän kysymys vaikkapa tähän kohtaan. Silloin kun mennään sinne 1990-luvulle vielä alkuun, niin sieltä tuli käytössä katsoen joka vuosi uusi hymni. Se oli edelleen se sama Aleksandrovin melodia, mutta se oli muutettu sovituksellisesti. Välillä se oli hieman sotaisampi, välillä siitä tuli fanfaareja pois ja välillä se oli merkitty legaatoja, jos forte fortiksi, muuttui mezzofortiksi. Sitten meni pari vuotta sitten ne forttiset oli taas takaisin ja aksentti päällä vuoteessa. Eli se vaihtui näin, että voitte tietenkin kuvitella sen vuoden, kun se hymni vaihtui kokonaan. Oli aika outoa soittaa, kun joka torstai meillä on Presidentinlinnassa suurlähettiläiden vastaanotto. Ja siellä soittaa aina sen maan hymni, niitä on jopa neljä viikossa parhaimpana aikoina. Se on, meillä soittaa aina tosi paljon. Niin sieltä tulikin hymni, joka ei alkanutkaan suuria mahtavaa, vaan nähtiin, se oli siis Linkan oopperasta Elämää tsaarin puolesta. Sehän oli heillä hymninä se 2 vuotta vai vuoden vai enemmän, en muista. Mutta sitten myöhemmin vaihtui takaisin taas suuria mahtavaksi, mutta eri sanoilla. Ja taas jatkui sama ralli, että siitäkin tulee sitten uusia sovituksia. Tai toisaalta se hetki, kun mä tulin kapellimestariksi ja Irakin vaihtui valta. Mä olin just tullut töihin kapellimestariksi, silloin ollut tilaisuus tietysti moneen kertaan. Ja katsoin sitä nuottia keskiviikkona iltapäivällä, että aha, siinä se tuli taas takaisin. Näin ajaa autolle ja pääsin Töölön asti, kun yhtäkkiä katsoin, että hetkinen, oliko se vihreä vihko. Palasin takaisin ja kauakseni huomasin, että kyllä. Siinä nimittäin lukee, että painettu 1956. Ajatolla Khomeini oli vaihtunut sitä siinä vaiheessa Irakissa valtiaksi ja totesi, että niille todennäköisesti ei ole samaa hymniä. ellei ne ole tehnyt Venäjää, eli vaihtanut sanoja. Ei ollut muuta vaihtoehtoa kuin soittaa suurlähetystöön, ja sieltä sitten löytyi murtaa englantia puhuva henkilö, jolle en löytänyt muuta keinoa kuin laulaa se edessä oleva hymni. Ja tunsin, kuinka luuri alkoi jäätyä kädessä. Sieltä tuli "They occur great difficulties if you play this anthem for our ambassador." No sitten mä käänsin auton suuntaan Herttoniemeen ja istuin siellä syömässä pähkinöitä tunnin verran ja sitten lopulta sitä löytäisin ne kasetti ja nuottikin. Mä menin kotiin, että tämähän meni helpoksi tämä juttu ja kävin kaupassa ja kello on siinä vaiheessa ollut sitten 8 aikaa tai 7 aikaa illalla. Mä katsoin sitä nuottia ja totesin, että ei ollut mitään järkeä. Sen nuotissa oli vain nuotteja. Ihan varmasti, mä en löydä muuta selitystä, että jollekin olisi ollut, että voitte kirjoittaa että meidän laulun nuoteiksi. Koska siinä ei, siis mä en miettinyt, että onko tämä joku arabialainen juttu. Ei ollut. Se on vaan siis sellaisia niin kuin 5-vuotias kirjoittanut nuottia tälleen näin. Sitten ei ajatellut muuta kuin laittaa pesään se niiden hymni, joka rätisi ja paukkui ja venyi ja meni silleen jutulla ja lopulta mä sitten sain jotenkin sen tehtyä ja siinä oli joku 48 taktia suurin piirtein. Lyijykynällä piti siihen aikaan kirjoittaa. Aamulla sitten oli harjoitukset 8 ja kirjoitettu 20 ihmisessä nuotit ja purettu se ulos siitä kasetilta laulettu version kautta just kuulu soittaa. Siinä sitten aamulla 10 aikaa se soitettiin ja siihen aikaan vielä piti pelätä, että onko nuotit kirjoitettu oikein. Mutta kyllä ne ilmeisesti oikein oli, koska iltapäivällä tuli soitto, että voisitteko äänittää meille tämän hymnin jatkokäyttöä varten, että meillä ei ole tätä hymniä ollenkaan äänitettynä. Tämmöisiä sieltä löytyy. Nationalismia sekin sitten kenties. Niin kuin sanottu, niin kyllä mä olen siitä tyytyväinen tässä kysymyksessä, että sotilassoittokuntien pitäisi oivaltaa tämä kysymys hyvinkin. Tulee mieleen 2 esimerkkiä. Mauno Koiviston aikaan käytiin lehdissä kovaa polemiikkia siitä, kun Mauno Koivisto sanoi, että urheilutilaisuuksissa pitäisi lopettaa näiden kansanlaulujen soittaminen, keskittyä vaan siihen urheiluun. Siitähän tuli hirveä. Se oli mielenkiintoinen lause siinä mielessä, kun muistan veljeni puhuneen siinä, että milloinhan syntyy se maailma, jossa nämä tehtaat ovat tärkeämpiä kuin ja firmat tärkeämpiä kuin kansallisuus. Eli soitetaan lopuksi Nokian tai Ferrarin hymni, kun kilpailut ovat päättyneet. Se on yksi kysymys. Ja toinen ulottuvuus syntyi siitä, kun entinen puolustusvoiman komentaja Jaakko Valtanen sanoi minulle, että jatkakaa tällä linjalla, että vaikka nyt näyttää tämä aika, siis puhun nyt tästä päivästä. Sanotaan lauseen 2012 vuonna. Sanoitte, että te rupeaisitte soittamaan tämmöisiä vastenmielisiä, isänmaallisia, patriottisia tunteja pursuavia kokonaisuuksia. Siinä mä olen hänen kanssaan ihan samaa mieltä. Nationalismissa on niin paljon vaaratekijöitä historiassa, kaikki olisi nähnyt, että meidän muusikoiden pitäisi ymmärtää, millainen ase meillä siinä suhteessa on käytössä.
All right. Kiitoksia. Now, if there's any further ideas or comments about today's speeches or contents, feel free to express them.
I forgot to say that there are some brochures of our UskoMus project.
Yes, music promotion goes on.
Yes.
Yeah, on my behalf, of course, I'm very thankful for all the speakers and members of the audience. It's nice to have these small-scale events as opposed to some big conferences points. And I think I agree totally that this is a pressing topic, as it seems, once again in the history of mankind or humankind and Europe especially. At some point in the morning I felt that I'm not sure how European this question after all is then, and then as opposed to, let's say, North America or United States especially, that what is the situation of that great nation as they put it so often in terms of music, and it's a more kind of melting pot in that sense also. But as noted, I guess we are living in a melting pot as well, and then the question is then that how do we operationalize the notion of the national in the musical contexts, and its significance is nothing to be dismissed of, I think. And as many cases here have shown, I think that it's a pertinent topic and needs to be discussed. And the last, for Hans' information, Raine was saying in the last instance that the military musicians especially should be very conscious about the strength of this weapon that they have at their disposal, and the way in which they can affect people's minds with that kind of a repertoire, especially referring to a comment from a former chief of military forces here in Finland, emphasizing this, that nowadays that don't go into the over-pompous patriotic style, even though whatever is happening. It's important to recognize the ways in which musical styles and idioms can be utilized in different ways. So, maybe on that note, I thank everybody again, and the plan is now to have dinner somewhere, so you're free to join me. I'm not so sure how many of us. There's going to be me and Hans at least, but we'll find a place, and then you're happy. We're happy to have you tag along if you wish. But anyway, thanks again, and good night.